a word on Dr. Jane Thurnell Reid. She's a former university lecturer and has been practicing kinesiologist from 1982 to 2004. She currently spends a lot of time researching and developing her extensive range of over 90 test kits. Writing is another passion, and her books include Verbal Questioning Skills for Kinesiologists, Nutritional Testing for Kinesiologists and Dowsers, Energy Mismatch, Allergy A to Z, and Geopathic Stress and Subtle Energy. It's thrilling to hear the word geopathic stress, and I'm also very keenly waiting to understand what this means. I'm sure you all join me in that search. This is Dr. Jane Thurnell for you.
First of all, I feel I need to approach speaking to you with a fair degree of humility, being that I'm British and bringing something to India. We don't have a very happy history of bringing things to India. I'm going to talk about geopathic stress. Geopathic stress, I think, is a missing link for a lot of people in terms of their health. And I want to talk about it today. One of the things that interests me about geopathic stress is how you can predict where sick people are living, sitting in an office, and so on. And we've talked about the link between science and the sort of subtle energy that we're interested in. One of the things scientists always say is the good test of a scientific theory is if it predicts accurately. And one of the things I want to show you is some case histories where I've predicted very accurately, much to the amazement of some engineering friends, exactly where people are who are sick and exactly what's wrong with them. So first of all, I've written a book called Geopathic Stress and Subtle Energy. There are copies of that in the bookshop, and so that will give you a lot more information. We've also, I think, oh no, I haven't put it. I'm happy to give people copies of what I'm saying. I always write it all out. So if you email me, jane@lifeworkpotential.com, then when I get back to England next week, I'll send you the transcript of what I'm going to say, although what I actually say always varies from what I plan to say, and I'll also send you copies of the slides. So it's Jane, J-A-N-E, at lifeworkpotential, all one word, lifeworkpotential.com. Just tell me you want the transcript and the slides from this talk, and I'll be happy to send them to you. It'll probably be, as I say, next week when I'm back in England, but you can send that email whenever you like. So, first of all, what is geopathic stress? So geopathic comes from two Greek words, geo meaning of the earth, and pathos meaning suffering or disease. So because of their detrimental effects, they're often known as negative earth energies. That's the other term that you'll hear people using, geopathic stress or negative earth energies. So geopathic stress is the general term for the effect of these energies that come out of the earth and that cause discomfort and ill health in human beings. The initial interest in geopathic stress started in Germany, and there's still a huge interest in Germany on geopathic stress. And it started in 1920, when there were practitioners who were able accurately to predict where the cancer sufferers were living in particular streets, in particular cities in Germany, without actually meeting those people. And when they did that, there was a lot of interest. Of course, a lot of scientists dismissed it, saying it was coincidence. There's a very high incidence of geopathic stress in those cities, therefore it wasn't very predictive, because you could, you know, if you plotted a line, then you'd probably find loads of people that had geopathic stress. But there were a lot of people who took interest in that in the 1920s, as I say, particularly in Germany, and it's developed from there. So if people react to geopathic stress, and I'll go into this in more detail in a while, then they may be tired. Women will often have miscarriages. You can have birth defects. Cancer is commonly found in people who live in geopathic areas, and so on. Now, unfortunately, most people don't realize, because they don't move into the house and then suddenly, one day they move into the house, the next day they've got cancer, and they go, oh, hang on a minute, I moved into this house yesterday, today I've got cancer. It doesn't usually happen like that. It takes quite a while, so people don't always connect it. And there's an interesting phenomenon, which is very often people who are particularly susceptible to geopathic stress actually keep buying houses that are geopathically stressed. And it's like their system has got adjusted to the geopathic stress. So their body is used to an environment that has geopathic stress in it. So though it's harming them, it feels normal to them. So they go to when they buy another house, and if you've ever bought a house, you can go into the house and immediately you think, oh yeah, this feels good for me. This feels like a house I'd like to live in. And I think a lot of these people, they seem to go into a new house and will immediately feel this is a good house. So they keep on buying houses that are geopathically stressed. It's like they're addicted to it in some way. Now, but if you need to be in a geopathic environment for quite a while to have a real effect on your health, but you can also have very transitory effects. And back in the 1990s, I was working with some engineers who got really interested in this concept of geopathic stress. And I was with one of them when he was giving I was with one of them when he was giving a lecture, and we got to the lecture room sometime before his lecture was due to start. And he said, I'm interested, can you check the room now and draw a plan of the room and tell me where you think the people who will be feeling tired or have headaches will be sitting during my lecture? So I said, okay. So I checked the room, drew the plan, and said, this is where they'll be. And right at the end of the lecture, he said to the people in the room, he said, can you put your hand up if you're feeling really tired or have a headache? And about 90% of the people who put their hands up were sitting on exactly the spots that I'd said. There were some people, obviously, who would be suffering from a headache or tiredness anyway, so there was a smattering of those. I'm not saying that geopathic stress is the only reason people get headaches and tiredness, but there were a very, very definite line. My engineering friend, who's a real scientist, was like, that's so impressive. So I was predicting, is what I was saying earlier. That it's important, I think, one of the speakers earlier was saying we will never convince the scientific community unless we have an explanatory model of how and why everything works. I think we'll never convince the scientific community until we can do predictive studies. Because they seem to dismiss everything else. But when you tell them about a study that has predicted something that's then turned out to be true, that they find impressive and find very hard to dispute. Back in 1991, I was asked to go to an office block in the City of London. And I was taken there by an engineer. And there was high absenteeism and high sickness rates in this building. It was the first 2 floors of the building. It was one of these very high buildings, and there were other floors above. But it was the first 2 floors. And he said to me, we're going in to look at the air conditioning, to see if there's a problem with the air conditioning, and this is why so many people are getting sick and the absentee rate is so high. But I'd like you to come with us. But I don't want you to make it obvious what you do. And I'm not going to explain to anybody what you do. So, okay. So I went with him, and I'm very good at sensing geopathic energies. So we went around the building, and I did my sensing, and I got a plan of the offices on the floor I went round, and I drew the geopathic energies there, and it was a big Z of geopathic energy. The line was like that, really big Z. And on that floor, there was a dealing room floor, dealing in financial futures or something. And the guys on the dealing room floor are, I think, not known for being spiritual, aware, or anything like that. But the engineer and I both noticed, we were there a whole morning, and every time we looked at the dealing room floor, there was no one standing in the Z where it changed directions. One of them was in the dealing room floor. And in that area, there was never anybody standing. And the dealing room floor was really crowded, and there were people everywhere else, but never anybody there. So maybe at some level, they knew. And so I drew this line, and one of the things that slightly worried me was we'd been told that some of the people in one of the offices were under threat of redundancy. There was a high chance that they were going to lose their jobs. Now, we've seen these slides earlier which show that stress affects your health, and being under the threat of losing your job is going to affect your health. So a bit of me went, well, it would be a safe bet to say the sick people sitting in this office, that's under the threat of redundancy. But in fact, the line didn't go through that office. So I decided to stick with my gut feeling. So I showed the engineer what I'd found, and he said, very interesting. So we then had a meeting with some of the senior managers for the firm. And he started talking about the air conditioning and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then he suddenly said, and Jane will explain about the geopathic stress. And went like that to me. And I was completely unprepared because he hadn't told me we were going to talk about it. So I started, my geopathic stress, and negative earth energies from the ground, da-da-da-da-da. And everybody folded their arms, leant back in their chairs, and you could see we're totally like, what is this woman talking about? This is complete rubbish. And I was getting slightly anxious, but I thought, well, okay, I'm going to press on. So I pressed on, and I produced the map. And I said, look, this is where I'm predicting the sick people are sitting. This is a map of that particular floor, the ground floor, and I would predict that you've got ill people sitting here. And suddenly, the human resources director leant forward and said, oh my God, yes, you're right, and all the sick people on the next floor up are sitting in exactly the same places. So they're sitting one on top of the other. Do you understand what I mean? Does that make sense? But it does make sense. If it's coming up from the ground and can go through concrete, earth, building, it's going to make sense that it's like that. That's what you would expect, yeah? So then she got really interested, and they asked me to take them round and show them exactly where this energy line was. So I had several people from the office with me. And remember I said about the Z and how the way it turned direction, and in the dealing room floor, there was nobody would be standing there. And I showed them the other office. It was in one of the offices where the other angle of the Z turned. And I said to them, and this is a really bad place. And as I said it, one of the women with us just suddenly rushed off. And later on, I managed to get hold of her, and I took her on one side, and I said, I noticed when I said, this is a really bad place, you just disappeared and looked very upset and concerned and bothered. And she said, "You were pointing to my desk, and I've had a lot of health problems." And she said, "I'm terrified of going to the doctors because of what he might say." And she said, "When you pointed at my desk," she said, "it just made me realize I have to do something about it." Sadly, I guess she would go to an allopathic doctor who'd give drugs and things. But anyway, and it was an open plan office, and that particular office, not only was she ill, but trying to conceal it from everybody, there were a lot of other people who were ill in that office as well. So that was a pretty good prediction, particularly as the fail-safe would have been to say, oh, it's in the office where the people who are going to be made redundant are. And then there's another interesting bit to this story, because sometime later I was at a conference and I was talking about this building, but because of client confidentiality, I didn't say the name of the building. It's a famous building in the City of London, and I didn't say the name of it. And afterwards, one of the people who'd been listening came up to me in the break, and she said to me, "I know what building you're talking about. You're talking about da, 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 da." And I said, "How do you know that?" Because I'd been really careful. You know, I said what I said to you. A building in the City of London, an office block. It's got a dealing room floor, but others have got dealing room floors. And she said, "I worked on the 3rd floor, and the 3rd floor was exactly the same. The pattern you've described, when I thought back to working there, everybody, the sick people, again, were sitting in the same places." So what we had is, so the ground floor had the dealing room floor, the dealers avoiding the area where the geopathic line changed direction. People experiencing sickness and absences tended to have desks on the geopathic line. On the 1st floor, though I didn't go to the 1st floor, the human resources director realized that the same placement of sick people was happening on this floor. On the 2nd floor, a conference participant identified the floor as having the same sickness pattern. That's pretty impressive, and I've yet to find a Western scientist who has an answer to this that they can explain that doesn't refer to geopathic stress. They don't have any way of explaining it. How could I know where the sick people are sitting? How could it be that on 3 floors, the sick people were sitting one on top of the other? Doesn't make sense. The other thing about this is just outside the office, there was a colony of feral cats, wild cats. And as I'll talk about in a minute, cats like geopathic energy. It seems to be good for them. So it attracts cats. So I wasn't surprised when